is one of my favorites out of the whole bunch, and we're gonna go back to the diminished scale and find some other patterns that we haven't discovered yet. This is just so cool. Check this one out. Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here, back again for the third part of our licks series. This is the advanced section. We did beginner, we did intermediate, and now we have 10 advanced licks that every jazz musician should know, and my voice is going, so we gotta get through this. I have this cold, and I don't know if I'm gonna make it through, but if I don't post this, I know that I'm gonna miss my schedule of posting every 37 and a half days. So let's get into it. Lick number 21 is this.
So we're gonna call this the whole step down lick, and that's because each one of these cells just goes down a whole step. C sharp down to B, that's a whole step. C natural down to B flat, another whole step. B down to A, another whole step.
Now, if you noticed on that sheet music, there's no chord symbol written anywhere. And that's because for a pattern like this, with the intervals this small and this symmetrical, you can kind of get away with it on any chord you want. It's a real modern jazz type of a line. In a way, it's kind of a beginner lick because you can play it anywhere, but really you should be using this in a way that sounds musical. And what I mean by that is make sure that you are getting into the lick in a musical way and exiting out of the lick in a musical way.
So we're gonna use a 2-5-1 progression now in the key of C major. And if you notice in the first measure, actually, we are doing a callback to a Joshua Redman lick that we covered in the intermediate licks video. But this intervallic line that I just went over is right here on the G7. There's the G7. And if you see here, we've got that cell, that 2-note cell going down a whole step. There it is again and again and again. And I carry it all the way through the C major 7 chord, the 1 chord there. And it's not until this part right here that I exit that pattern. The pattern ends right on this F sharp. And then starting on that F sharp, I'm doing a D major arpeggio. Now the chord is C major 7, but by arpeggiating a D major triad, I actually get to use some of those more exotic extensions like the sharp 11 and the 13 and the 9.
All right, let's keep going here. Lick number 22 is inspired by Roy Hargrove, and it utilizes a major third on a minor chord, which is counterintuitive, but it sounds great. Check it out.
So this one's really hip because we've got an F sharp on a D minor chord. In other words, we've got the major third on a minor chord. You don't usually hear the major third on a minor chord, which is why it sounds so hip. But also we're using that dissonant note in a musical way. We're using it kind of like a chromatic passing tone as we go from F to F sharp to G, then back down from F sharp to F. There are many different creative ways of using the major third on a minor chord. This is just one that I think sounds really, really cool, so give it a try.
Lick number 23 uses the diminished scale. Check it out.
So what we have here is the C diminished scale, the whole half diminished scale. And so what that means is we're going up a whole step and then up a half step.
So now that you have that scale in mind, we're going to apply a pattern that makes the scale a little bit more interesting than just running it up and down. Check this out.
So we're going to start on the C, which is the root of the chord, and we're going to go down one step, and then we're going to go up, and then we're going to go up again, and then up again. It's all stepwise motion. Repeat the pattern. Go down, and then up, up, up. All right, so here's that pattern within a lick or a longer line. So if you take a look here, we've got F sharp diminished 7, and then we're starting on the root, just as we did before, down a step, up, 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 down, up, up, and then when we go up one more, we land on the 1 or the root of C7.
And I want to make sure you're noticing that I exit out of the pattern smoothly. That B resolves up to the C and then I continue on, but it is not this weird thing that I just shove into the lick. It has to be integrated. So spend time entering and exiting your licks. That's something to practice, not just learning the licks individually, but also learning how to get in and out of them. All right, on to lick number 24. This is another one inspired by one of my teachers, Jerry Bergonzi, who I studied with at music school. And it utilizes triads on a dominant chord. Check this out.
All right, so here's the Bergonzi triad lick, and I want you to pay attention to the triads. We've got a G major triad right here, and we have an E major triad right here. Now I know it says A flat there, and that doesn't really line up with E major that well, but remember, A flat is the enharmonic of G sharp, and the G sharp will obviously sit a lot better within that context of E major. But I wrote A flat because it's the flat 9 of the G7, so I want you to know where that comes from.
Make sure you're paying attention to the relationship between that E major triad and the root of the chord, which is G. So E major, or E, is a sixth away from G. That's how you're going to remember what triad to play on the dominant chord. It's easy to remember the G triad, right, because it aligns with the root, but the other triad starts on the sixth. G is the root, E is the sixth of that scale.
It just so happens that the E major triad accentuates that flat 9 of G7. And it also has the B, which is the third of G7. It has the E, which is the 13 of G7. There's that flat 9 one more time, resolving beautifully into the G right there. And more often than not, that chord right there would be a C major 7. And the G, of course, is the 5 of C major 7. So here's that Vincent Herring lick that we talked about in the last video with the intermediate licks.
Now let's take that D minor setup and flow into the Bergonzi triad lick.
All right, there's our D minor setup, and here are our Bergonzi triads. We have the G major triad and the E major triad.
So we're on to lick number 25. This one uses a very cool scale called the Augmented scale, but again, we're going to play it using a pattern so it doesn't just sound like a scale running up and down. Check it out.
So this lick looks and sounds a little complicated, but we're going to break it down and build it back up so you really understand what's happening here under the hood. We're going to start with another symmetrical scale. It's another scale that's based off of intervals. Here we have the interval of a minor third going up and then a half step going up. So we have a minor third and then a half step. And then we're going to do the same thing. Go up a minor third and then a half step. And what's really cool about this scale is that within it are major triads that we can use as inspiration for all kinds of patterns and lines. So take a look here. We've got a C sharp, an F, and a G sharp. That's a C sharp major triad. Now if we start in the F, we've got an F, an A, and a C. That's an F major triad. Start in the A, we've got a C sharp and an A major triad.
So now that you know the Augmented scale and you're aware of the triads within it, we're going to rearrange the notes to get closer to the final lick that you heard at the beginning of this segment.
So let's take those 3 triads again, but instead of arpeggiating them up, let's arpeggiate them down. We're going to get even closer to the final lick now. We still have the 3 triads, descending arpeggios, but we're going to add a pickup note to each one of them. And that pickup note is going to be a half step above the first note of the arpeggio. So the first note of this arpeggio is E, a half step above E is F. And in case you didn't notice, the 3 major triads that we're arpeggiating here are all a major third apart from one another. So here's the full lick, and what we've done here is just take that same pattern and squish it together, taking out all the rests. So here we have the A major triad with the pickup starting a half step above. Here's our F major triad with the pickup note a half step above. Here's our C sharp major triad with the pickup note a half step above. And the last few notes here just make up my exit ramp to get out of this pattern.
Lick number 26 is another very cool intervallic pattern. It's not really a scale, it's just a series of intervals that are stacked. You'll see what I mean. Check this out.
So here's another lick that looks complex, it looks really tough, but if we break it down, you will see the patterns and you will understand what's going on here. We're gonna start with a simple pattern of going up in perfect fourths. So we're gonna start on a C, and a fourth up from C is F, and a fourth up from F is B flat. We're gonna go a whole step up, that's D, and we're gonna do the same thing. Up a perfect fourth to G, and then up another perfect fourth to C. Rinse and repeat.
So you've got the basic pattern now, and we're going to start tweaking it to get closer to the final product.
So we're starting the same exact way, going up perfect fourths, starting on C. But instead of going D, G, C on the next one, we're gonna do the same notes but in reverse. So here's D, G, C, but as you can see, we're starting with the C and going down perfect fourths. And now when we take a look at the final lick, you'll see it's exactly what I just showed you. We have up, down, up, down, up, and then that right there is just how I exit out.
Lick number 27 is another one inspired by one of my past teachers. This one's inspired by Will Vinson, great alto saxophonist. You should definitely check him out if you haven't already. And it's a very modern sounding lick, and it uses this tritone thing and another triad, kind of like the Bergonzi lick, but more tritone-y. Check this one out.
So this is another lick that makes use of a major triad, and the chord that we have here is G7, and the major triad that we're inserting is a D flat major triad right in there. A flat is the fifth of D flat. D flat, of course, is the 1, and then F is the 3rd. So if we're implying a D flat major triad, it's important to understand the relationship between that D flat and the G. And by relationship, I mean the interval between those two notes. So that interval right there is a tritone. So we start on the root of the chord, which is G, and then we're going to go up a major triad based on the triad that's a tritone away from the root of the chord. And then I'm going to come down the same way, coming down the major triad, the D flat major triad, and resolving to the G again, but this time the G is the 5th of C major 7. Here's that Will Vinson tritone thing in the context of another lick. Now, right here is a little shout out to the reverse freshman. Right in here is the reverse freshman, and then going back up the freshman arpeggio. That's from the first video in this series, the beginner licks, everyone should know. And then in the second measure on that G7, there is our Will Vinson tritone triad, and that's going to resolve back down to G, which is the 5th of C major 7.
Lick number 28 is another cool modern jazz lick inspired by the tritone, and it also uses a triad pair. Check this one out.
So this lick is actually a lot like what we did with that stacked fourths lick where we went up and then down, except instead of using stacked fourths, we're going to use major triads. So I'm going to break it down and we'll build it back up. So the chord that we're working with is a G7 chord. So we're going to start with a G major triad. Here's a G major triad in root position. Here's a G major triad in first inversion, and here's a G major triad in second inversion. Now we're going to do the same thing, but instead of a G major triad, we're going to use a D flat major triad. A major triad that's a tritone away from the root. The root of the chord is G, a tritone away from G is D flat, so we have a D flat major triad here. Now we're going to take the exercise and combine the G major triads and the D flat major triads. We're going to alternate between the two. Here's the next level of the exercise, starting the same way, going up with a G major triad. But now we're going to take the 3 notes we used for a D flat major triad and just go down. And then we're going to go up again for G major and then down for D flat major. Up for G major, down for D flat major. So the final lick is the same pattern. The only difference is here in this example, we're starting in second inversion for the G major triad right here. The D right there is the 5th of a G major chord. And then we're going down on a D flat, up on a G major, down on a D flat, up on a G, down on a D flat, up on a G, and down on a D flat, and then finally resolving to the E, which is the 3rd of C major 7.
We're on to lick number 29. This is one of my favorites out of the whole bunch, and we're going to go back to the diminished scale and find some other patterns that we haven't discovered yet. This is just so cool. Check this one out.
We are working with a basic chord progression here, a 5 chord going to a 1 chord, C7 going to F major 7. Here's our C diminished scale, and this one's different than what we did earlier in the video because instead of a whole half diminished scale, this is a half whole diminished scale. What does that mean? Well, when you go from C to D flat, that's a half step. And then D to E flat is a whole step. E flat to E is a half step, and the pattern continues. Half, whole, half, whole, half, whole. Now, just like with that augmented scale, we're going to actually be able to find some major triads within the diminished scale. So check this out. I'm going to do some circling here. A C, an E, and a G gives us C major. An E flat, a G, and a B flat gives us E flat major. A G flat, a B flat, and a D flat gives us G flat major. And an A, a D flat, also known as C sharp, and an E gives us A major. So we actually have 4 major triads baked into this scale. Here are those 4 triads stacked so they're a little bit easier to see. But the next step in this exercise is to take those 4 major triads and arpeggiate them going down. It's the 1, the 5, and the 3. Now we have an E flat major chord, 1, 5, 3. And then finally the C major chord, 1, 5, 3. I think it's also important to note the relationship between each one of these triads. They're all separated by a minor third. So we're getting closer to the final version of this lick. What I want to point out here is that A major arpeggio is right there. But the note we're starting with is actually a C natural. There's a few different ways you can think about it. You can think of it like that C natural being the minor third of an A major. Or you can think of it as a sharp 9 within an A major context. Let's do the next one. The next chord that we're outlining is going to be G flat major, and that arpeggio is right in here. And then the A is like the minor third of G flat, or the sharp 9 of G flat. Right in here we have the E flat major triad, and the minor third within the context of E flat is F sharp or G flat. All right, the final one, we have a C major triad, and then we're starting off with a D sharp, aka E flat, which is the minor third in the context of C, or the sharp 9 in the context of C, however you want to think about it. And now here's the final version of the lick. It's the same notes we just had in that previous exercise, but now we have some more interesting rhythmic stuff happening. I'm using triplets and grouping them in groups of 4 to kind of give this a even more modern feel to it. But in terms of the pitches, it's the same thing. We have our triads. That kind of ends right there and right here. And we have this one here. And we have our sharp 9s, or our minor thirds, corresponding with each one of those triads. Again, lots of different variations you can mess around with here rhythmically, and also just messing around with those triads that are baked into the diminished scale.
All right, we made it to lick number 30. This one is from Kenny Garrett. It's a lift right from a Kenny Garrett solo, from his solo on, I think it's 2 down, 1 across. And it's chaos, but it sounds so great. And we're gonna break it down. There's so much to dissect here, but we're gonna do our best to cover as much as possible. Here's the lick, and then we'll see what's going on under the hood.
So there's obviously a lot happening on this lick, but what's so cool is that it's one chord, and there is just all kinds of stuff going on here over that one chord. We start with the stacked 4th thing, kind of like what we did with that intervallic lick from a few licks back. And then we'd pull out another callback, this right here, the freshman arpeggio in a classic formation. This is on an E flat minor 7 chord, remember? And we have the 9, the 3rd, the 5, the 7, and the 9 again. We're gonna arpeggiate down just using chord tones right here. We already said that F right there is the 9, and then the D flat is the 7, the B flat is the 5, and the F is the 9 again. You could also think of this as a B flat minor triad right in here, B flat minor triad. Now this is cool, right in here. We have A, D, B, and G. That's outlining a G major sound, which is really wild in the context of E flat minor, but it sounds good because there's enough context there on a horizontal level. Again, you can't be playing these funky notes without enough to ground it on a melodic level. So the A, that's that sharp 11. a weird note for a minor chord. The D is the major 7. I mean, these notes don't make any sense. B is the sharp 5. G is the major 3rd. None of these notes are quote unquote right in the context of E flat minor, but because it's such a strong melodic idea, you can pull it off. That's the magic of Kenny Garrett's playing. He plays all these really weird notes that don't make any sense vertically, but because they're so strong on a horizontal level, it works. That's a huge takeaway from this line. This next figure makes use of the stacked perfect fourth thing that we talked about earlier. A to D is a perfect fourth, and then B to E is another perfect fourth. And you've got two cells there, and they're a whole step apart from one another. That's always a cool sound. Perfect fourths transposing in whole steps like that. It sounds really, really cool. Now, when he gets to the C sharp, it's continuing the pattern that was just established, but we're not going to keep doing those perfect fourths at this point. We're going to go up using an A major arpeggio. C sharp is the 3rd of A major, E is the 5th, A, of course, is the 1, and then we're doing 1, 2, 3. Those 3 notes right there. So very similar to up here with that implied G major. Now we have an implied A major, which is another example of harmony that doesn't really fit E flat minor, but it's really strong melodically and sounds cool. This next part right in here, it's a lot of chromatics happening there. We are going up the chromatic scale, D sharp, E, F, and then what's going on here? F to E flat, that's going down a whole step, and then we're sort of enclosing this note right here. This is an enclosure right in here. So I'll erase all this chicken scratch. We have E, that's kind of like a target note, and it's being enclosed by the F and the E flat. Honestly, it's just getting really wiry in here, and there's so much chromatic action that you really can't go wrong. It's kind of similar to that intervallic lick that we started this video off with, where we went down a whole step, up a half step, down a whole step, up a half step. When you have intervals that are that small, you can kind of get away with anything. And that's what's going on here. He's going down the chromatic scale from E to E flat to D flat. Here's C, continuing on to B flat to A flat to G flat. So it's just one long chromatic scale. And I think I should say here, I haven't said it at all this video, but it's a really important point. And that is that the reason that a chromatic scale can sound so good is because of how well he's phrasing, how he's playing it. It's not the notes, it's how he's playing the notes. That is like one of the fundamental parts of making any of these licks sound good, especially the ones that have these more dissonant melodies and harmonic values. You have to be playing these licks with good phrasing and good feeling. And if you can do that, then you can make a chromatic solo sound like the hippest thing ever. And that's what he's doing here. After that chromatic flurry of notes, he's bringing it back into the realm of E flat minor. He's arpeggiating a B flat minor chord right there. And B flat minor is not too far off from E flat minor 7. We can actually analyze it in terms of E flat minor 7. A flat being the 11, F being the 9, D flat is the 7, and B flat is the 5. So if you want to look at it on a micro level, you'll see that it's a B flat minor 7 arpeggio, but on a macro level, it's still E flat minor 7, and all of those notes fit very nicely on a vertical harmonic level. Last but not least, he's using one of my favorite scales / sounds on a minor chord, especially using a Dorian mode, and that is this note right in here, that C natural. That is the 6th of E flat minor, and it's a very, very cool sound. This scale right in here is sometimes referred to as a minor 6 pentatonic scale. You have the 1, you have the 6, the 5, the 4, there's the 5 again, and then finally the 3. So nothing too fancy there, but I really do appreciate and like that sound of using that 6 there in the scale.
Here's the whole lick one more time, slowed down so you can hear what's going on a little bit better. All right, we've made it through all 30 licks, the beginner, the intermediate, the advanced. If you want to download the sheet music for these, you can in the link below. It's free, and it'll help you learn these licks and integrate them into your solos. Thank you guys for watching, and I'm I'm kind of amazed that my voice is still working. So good for me. And good for you for watching till the end.